Alright, what's poppin', people? We're back. And this music is not too loud. Nice! So, we got a VR update, and this is being recorded on the 1st of June, so we actually will also be getting not tier shifts. Well, technically we could get drops, but we're going to be getting usage updates today, so I'll probably record another video later today for that, and that'll go up on the 2nd, or the 3rd, whichever day it needs to. But we finally have a VR update. This kind of be considered the mid-NUPL update, NUPL being a team tour. That's only NU for those of you that don't know that. And there are a good amount of changes, and I think with how the VR looks right now, especially if you look at the higher ranks, especially like A+ and higher, it looks really indicative of that meta right now, which I think is kind of cool. Anyhow, let's get into it. As always, if you enjoy these more informative videos where I'm just kind of talking about metagame developments and other resource updates, leave a like, man, comment about it, show your support, and subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. We're on the way to 2,000 subs. If we can get to 2,000 subs by the end of today's Robiamus, that would be quite insane. But let's get into it. So, Rises, we're going to start off with Dragalge to S-. Anyone that's been playing NU recently knows the insane amount of hype Dragalge has had. We talked about it a little bit in the Dragalge-centric video we did, where people are really starting to tap into Dragalge's wall-breaking prowess. Whether that's through using choice specs, whether it's through using substitute, whether that's just taking your standard utility-based Dragalge and just throwing Focus Blast in as the last move. With the transition to Stack Attack as the best steel type, people naturally are going to look for ways to abuse those 4x weaknesses that it's got. And Dragalge is one of the best at it because it's just so naturally is going to draw in Stack Attack because it's a Dragon Poison type. Stack Attack's typing naturally counters that, and you can clock it with Focus Blast. I think it's probably the wall breaker that requires the most respect when you're building a team. It's an incredible pivot. Synergizes really well with a lot of our other pivots too, especially Rotom-C, who now actually stands as the sole SS rank. I'll get more to that later. And I think, yeah, it's probably in conversations for being top 2 or 3 in the tier. And with Dragalge rising, of course, Escavalier is going to rise too. You know, it's a steel type that does not get tabled by Dragalge's Focus Blast, otherwise switches into its stab moves about as well as anything you'll find in the tier. A set recently we've seen get more use as well as like Sword Stance with Rest. If you pay attention to NU, you'll know the most common team type right now by far is going to be Wish Balance. So you'll have either Sylveon or Vaporeon, and Escavalier can really easily run Rest with those because those Pokemon always have Heal Bell too. So you get the Cleric support, you're able to have a lot more sustain, and since so many of NU games right now I feel do really just come down to a sustain battle, yeah, Rest is really good. I think it's why Snorlax fits so well into the meta too right now. It didn't rise in this update, but maybe it will in a future one. But even just having Knockoff as a move I think is pretty cool for a Scav too. You know, we talked about how this is such a longevity-based metagame. I think having ways to weaken your foes' longevity is also really good. And continuing that trend, Vaporeon also goes up to A+. I'll always kind of stand by it that I do think Vaporeon as a Pokemon's a little overrated, but its spot in the metagame right now is pretty clear. You know, it's one of our 2 best Wish Passers in the tier. The mana is just obscenely bulky, and unless you are constantly bringing a Pokemon that Vaporeon literally can't touch, think about Heliolisk and Toxicroak, then the mon's probably going to find turns to pass Wishes. I think one of the few trends you could really point to that, you know, kind of again always goes counterproductive to Vaporeon being truly metagame defining top of the tier is that rise of like substitute on Dragalge. Vaporeon just doesn't do anything to you. You sub up and you make life very, very difficult for it. But for now, Vaporeon I think really does deserve A+. I think if you look at NUPL usage, it should be near the top because it does a lot in one slot, especially as we see more people. If you look down here, you see an Inteleon rise. People are starting to use Inteleon a little bit more because it really punishes people that don't build with a sturdy water type check. And Vaporeon's going to be the best thing you can really get with that. Anyhow, now we get a couple wall breakers. Indeedee and Machamp both go up to A. Indeedee, probably known more for its Choice Scarf set. Having a fast Healing Wish is always really cool. It synergizes super well with like Silvally Ground, for an example, because Silvally Ground can wall break kind of for itself early on because multi-attack is just really strong. And then Indeedee could potentially Healing Wish it back up later, so then you could go for like Flame Charge, Swords Dance, and Dash Attack Sweep from there. It's otherwise just really nice because Expanding Force does a lot, even to resistant Pokemon. So getting to a point where you can clean up with it late is pretty easy. And as we continue to watch the slow decline, I would say, of Dark types in NU, I feel we're seeing a little bit of a resurgence with Drapion usage, but the month special bulk is kind of depressing, so it doesn't take too much to put it in range of Indeedee with the coverage you move later on. But as we see fewer Dark types, and people relying more on Steel types to try to catch Indeedee, well, hey, you got Mystical Fire. Evo Stack Attack being so good, it just hasn't really mattered. People will run Indeedee alongside, say, like Spectre Galaxy and just say, okay, check both of them. Good luck. And Machamp Rise to Eggs, I think it's probably the best pure wall breaker in the tier. I feel Dragalge still can be viewed more as a utility Pokemon / a pivot. Machamp is a pure breaker, and it does it better than a lot of other mons. This is something that's always been the case with Machamp, but Guts, meaning that Pokemon like Guts meaning Pokemon like Talonflame and Vileplume, and even Weezing, can't cripple you with status is really big, because that's how a lot of teams do pack their counterplay to fighting types. It's going to be those sorts of resists, and Pokemon that may be kind of pressured by coverage, but can at least get a panic, you know, burn off in the process, or any other kind of status if you're looking at Vileplume. And Machamp doesn't care. It's clicking Facade and it's OHKOing or 2-hit KOing you on the switch. It's outspeeding you because it's got just enough speed to get past those walls that aren't, you know, fast enough and can't take too much out of bulk to try to, you know, compete speed-wise. It's just, you know, you talk about Pokemon that are literally just click in how their play works out. That's Machamp. You're just clicking Facade. You see a Ghost type on the other team? Okay, maybe click Knock once to try to catch it and say no. You know, good old Dikembe Mutombo. Finger wag at him, say no, not in my house. You don't get to switch into my fighting type like that. Anyhow, next up, Quagsire. Alongside Stack Attack, I think is a really good defensive core. But Quagsire in general right now just denies a lot of setup sweepers from sweeping. You know, you talk about Tyrantrum, Silvally Ground, Blastoise even. You can run enough special bulk on Quagsire to where Blastoise can't 2-hit KO you with Surf into Torrent Surf. And that's really nice because, I mean, hey, Blastoise is one of the most threatening setup sweepers in the tier. It gets to +2, and yeah, better don't get lucked by Dark Pulse or Ice Beam, or a miss. And of course, it's a ground type. And ground types are just really good to have in the metagame. Even though Quagsire isn't like a great answer to Rotom-C because Leaf Storm kind of hits you a little hard. Also, I'm gonna turn down the music a little bit. Actually, no, it's fine. I just keep seeing it pop up a little loud in the OBS mixer, but it should be fine. I think I'm speaking over it. And we'll still turn it down. There we go. Now it's so quiet no one can hear it. Excellent. But yeah, Quagsire is really durable too because of Recover. I think that's always really nice when you can set yourself apart from the competition. In this case, Mudsdale and I guess Silvally Ground, but Ground Valley is an offensive ground type. But Mudsdale's a lot more reliant on Wish Recovery to keep itself at high health. And that can be a little bit annoying when teams start getting more offensive in nature and they just don't give you as many turns as you'd like to safely pass those wishes. Mudsdale just requires a little bit better positioning to secure those wish passes, whereas Quag doesn't need to do that. Then we get Serena up to A. In-use hazard control kind of sucks. A lot of teams will rely on like Scarf, Rotom-C with Defog. And that's abusable. You know, we've seen some like Spikes builds pick up usage lately with the sole intent of saying, okay, Your removal is Choice Scarf, Rotom-Mo? Okay. Spikes are just more punishing, I feel. To have to waste turns defogging. Because you are able to stack a lot more hazards against the opposing team and really increase the urgency with which they need to get that defog off, you know? And if you're choice selected to defog, there's a lot more room for being exploited by the opposition. And Serena doesn't deal with that issue. Obviously you're not choice locked in a rapid spin ever. Even could potentially support spikes of your own if you're running like a Garbodor. And it does a lot else too for teams. It's like probably one of the best utility Pokemon available because it's not passive. It's pretty self-sufficient because you can run Synthesis. It can spread knockoffs. Again, it's not choice locked in removal like Scarf Rotom-Mo is. It gives teams another option for when they'd maybe like to combine some other traits into their Pokemon. Then we get Croak up to A-. I think Croak's just been underranked for a while. It's really strong. +2 Toxicroak. Has some disgusting damage rolls, I'll put it that way. It's got some disgusting damage rolls, I'll put it that way. Because when you talk about this Pokemon, Adamant Life Orb, low kick, is probably the calc you'll always see referenced. You look at Mudsdale getting O-Code after Stealth Rock, I think? Like full defense Mudsdale too, we're not talking about Mudsdale's taking some bulk out of their physical defense and putting it into special defense. No. Like 252 is getting O-Code. It's really vile. And again, we talk about the rise of Inteleon and even just offensive water types in general. Having a Pokemon that gives you a little extra room against those is pretty nice. Now we see Drapion up to B+. Chocoberry SD is the flavor set of the month for Drapion. And a lot of that comes down to offensive ghost types are, in decline. So Drapion doesn't feel as inclined to run Black Sludge for the extra sustain so that you could switch into those Poltergeists more frequently, for example. So you go to Chocoberry with Aqua Tail, and it makes you alert to Silvally Ground and Mudsdale. You can draw them in and then 2-hit KO them from there. That can be a really good setup for, say, Dragon Dance Tyrantrum, as an example. Executor Lola goes up to B+2. It's just a really good breaker. Whether you're running like teleport sets with a Citrus Berry to also give you a little more sustain, whether you're running just specs and trying to blast holes in teams that do kind of follow really formulaic patterns when it's like water type with a steel type, the ground type with maybe a grass type. I feel like a lot of balance builds look like that. And so, hey, Alolan Executor can take advantage of that really effectively. Heliolisk up to B+. Oh yeah, it's also a Vaporeon abuser, just like Heliolisk. As Vaporeon gets good, Pokemon that take advantage of Vaporeon rise up. I do agree with, I think Mary Berry put it in her reasonings portion, where she says, yeah, Heliolisk has just always been a little underappreciated. And I agree. It's perfectly serviceable. I think it's better than what you would otherwise have in B that's more situational. Whether you're running a choice set, with Scarf always being kind of nice to upset Blastoise spammers. Whether you're running specs, magnet, boots, what have you, it's always going to kind of put in work. Be a little annoying to switch into because of the coverage. I've used magnet recently too, and it is kind of nice for pretending to be specs because your damage output has some overlap with lower choice specs damage rolls, which is kind of cool. And having the freedom to switch your moves up, I would also say, is really big. Not letting ground types safely pivot into you because you could catch them with Grass Knot or Surf on the next turn is really cool. Scrafty, this bond's annoying as hell. I feel like if you don't have a fairy type, you lose to it. Talonflame does not outdamage bulk up Scrafty. It's too fat. So you see a lot of teams, their counterplay is gonna be, you have a Sylveon or a Diancie, or you are praying it never gets set up. Maybe trick it a Scarf. Maybe set up with like a Swords Dance Toxicroak, boost faster than it, and just pummel it. Maybe you have a Machampus or Fetch that's just so strong it breaks past it. But otherwise, that mon is annoying and really does, like Snorlax for example, threaten to just end games from Team Preview. And another Vaporeon abuser, Araquanid. It's literally subtoxic every time. You are trying to match up against Vaporeon and exploit that matchup. That is all. There's really nothing else to it. It's also really strong, weirdly enough. Like, I don't know if y'all have seen the liquidation damage rolls, even versus like Dragalge, but you're doing like 40. So you get a sub up, Dragalge switches in you because like, okay, just take your stab attacks. The mod does not beat you very reliably. You can like liquidate and just keep staying in and spamming it, and that mon is taken out of commission. Like, this is not only great at abusing Vaporeon builds, but I think just in general at wall breaking. Good mon. As I mentioned earlier, Inteleon rise up to B-. It's really, really fast and really good at just taking advantage of teams that do not have a Vaporeon that can just blank your water type attacks. I guess also Mantine kind of falls into that. So when you're running into those like Sylveon Wish builds, I would say is where Inteleon features a lot better. Because, you know, Sylveon runs special bulk a lot of the time, like at least a little bit. And Inteleon specs Hydro Pump does, I think you 2-hit KO with Rocks Up, or you have like a damage roll too. So it's pretty nice. And Togedemaru up to B-. Rotom-Mo is the best Pokemon in the tier, and Togedemaru is about the closest thing that comes to a counter. So sure. Ferrocene up to C+, talked about a little earlier. People rely really heavily on Scarf Rotom-Mo to be their way of beating hazards. That's your defogger. And so spikes are really good against that. You force the issue of defogging constantly, and that's a way of generating momentum for yourself, so you can position a breaker or setup sweeper in on that turn with the defog, and, you know, get a free hit off, or get a free boost. Glastrier up to C+. Mod's still pretty niche, but Hoenn Confirmed used it recently, and it did really well. It's just, it's a good way of counteracting a lot of those Wish balance teams, because those Wish passers are not strong enough to get past your substitute. And I think another big thing too is just with Bronzong gone, your move slots are not as dire as they once were. So you can go sub Sword Stance with an ice move in close combat, and you're sitting a lot prettier than you were back when you had to be like, oh god, am I running Throat Chop over CC? Oh. Again, kind of another Pokemon that benefits from Stack Attacka being the primary steel type. Ninjask up to C+, apparently. Huh. That's interesting. Anyhow, Silvally Steel, I think, also went up to C+. It's like, okay. A lot of roll compression. It's pretty decent on offense. But when you run it on offense, you feel like you need Wish. But when you run it on a Wish bounce build, you feel like you could just be a different steel type. It's an awkward Pokemon. I do think it has a surprisingly nice amount of versatility with your move slots, because other than like multi-attack parting shot, you know, maybe you've got hazard control elsewhere, so you could fit like status. You could run Rock Slide to lure Talonflame. Flamethrower is just generally nice for chip-on steals. There's options. It's just kind of weird. I feel like it's almost never the optimal Pokemon is probably my biggest gripe with it. Galarian Stunfisk up to C+. It's a ground steel type. We still wish we had Steelix. That's all I can say there. And against some teams, it's honestly kind of nice. Kind of good at sub Dragalge as well, I've noticed, because your bulk is still good enough to where Focus Blast won't 2-hit KO you. And of course, Earthquake is always breaking sub and threatening really, really high damage against Dragalge. Your favorite to win that 1v1 just because of Focus Blast's accuracy, frankly. Now we got a couple new ranks. We got not Drampa yet, Sandaconda all the way up to B-. It's a relatively fast ground type, so you can EV it really easily to be faster than Dragalge's. That's really nice, so it means you're not forced to switch out as maybe they sub up on you, or throw off a Choice Specs Draco Meteor, like you might be with Mudsdale. Glare is just really good utility. Shed Skin means you could run Rest really reliably as recovery. Unless you're me, then you never wake up with Shed Skin from Rest. You're always asleep the full turns. It's even like a nice kind of panic check to Silvally Ground, I've noticed, because +2 multi-attack is not doing enough damage. So then you glare it so that it's slow, and then you get an Earthquake off, and you've by then also gotten 2 rounds of Rocky Helmet. Very easy to revenge kill from there. And Rock Resists, those are always good too. It's always really nice to not let the Dragon Dance Tyrantrums of the world just have a field day versus you, you know? Eldegoss C+, I feel like this Pokemon was used more in a previous meta. Like, say, like, when Silvally Ground was really getting the hype around a potential ban. But Regenerator plus Rapid Spin is pretty nice, just as a concept. Eldegoss can be kind of annoying to take down. Its natural special bulk's also weirdly high, so you could actually scout some of the more annoying special attackers with it. Say, for instance, Specs Sylveon. It's just always such a weird mon to want to build with. I've done eject button with it before too, so you could come in on a Silvally Grounds U-turn. You then deny their pivot, because eject button, I guess, cancels U-turn, giving the opponent a switch. So you cancel their pivot, then you get to bring in maybe like an Inteleon of yours, and you, at least for one turn, get to limit the Silvally Ground. It's kind of like a way of saying, okay, wait, reset, guys. Let's not do this Silvally Ground stuff where it's chipping my whole team yet, with +2 U-turns. Jellicent, I think we all know at this point what this mon does. It's Taunt with a status move, kind of stall breaker stuff. Another just option for a water immune and general bulky water type. General good all around. Drampa, it's like a niche version of the other dragon types that offers a bit different of defensive utility. Can also run like specially defensive utility sets with Defog to some success. Again, very niche Pokemon, but it's functional. I could say that much. And then Kabutops-C, it's the new entry hazard suicide lead of the month for those hyper offense teams. And now we get to all the drops. I did not mean to drag that. Now we get to all the drops. Talonflame down to S-. I think some of it is Aerodactyl gets a little more usage nowadays, even if that is waning in usage. Aerodactyl's not as common as it had been, but this still gets enough to where I'm like, okay, Talonflame I don't need on this team. I can get another fast flying type that threatens to revenge kill, say, Salazzle and Inteleon. Stack Attack being around is a little more annoying too, because if you, it just, you know, we're trying to like invalidate Defog Talonflame even further. It was already terrible. Now there's just another Pokemon that makes it not worth my time to run. And frankly, some of it's just Rotom-C feels so much better than Talonflame that it would be unreasonable to keep it on the same level as Talonflame, you know? Like, some of it's not even that Talonflame's become exponentially worse, so much as Rotom-C has solidified itself as the best Pokemon in the tier by a fair margin, and as a result, deserves its own ranking. You get me? Zavunas drop blesses. Oh yeah, Talonflame's fairly worse now. And view it more as Rotom-C is just the best. And the same for Silvally Ground, although I feel this mon has gotten a bit noticeably worse. Mudsdale competition is a lot stronger nowadays. Quagsire competition as well. Sandaconda rising up, so there are just more options for ground types. So you're no longer having to say like, oh, I want Silvally Ground, here's a, you know, different Mudsdale ground type. That was usually the old justification, and how it got its spot in the meta in large part to begin with. And it also feels like teams are just more naturally prepared for it. You can view the rise of Weezing being a big thing, as well as Pokemon like Decidueye, Dhelmise getting pretty consistent usage. These are Pokemon that Grand Valley does have to take a few more turns trying to actually get past, so they could, you know, potentially Swords Dance and clean late game. And I mean, hey, you want to talk about Inteleon Rising? That's another fast Pokemon that can revenge kill Silvally Ground with ease, even with like Surf. So there's that. And we see Raja down to A+. This is just increased Steel type competition, and also we can do this now. Let me check. See, look at this. The Steel types and the Wish Passers all in A-. Doesn't that just feel right to you? Feels right to me. But you got Stack Attack is the best Steel in the tier. We still had Raja ranked above Staka in our first update, because it felt like Assault Vest Copper Raja was just back to being incredible, and it still is. But with a Scavalier coming back into the fray too, it's just like, there are a lot of builds where you don't really feel pressed to use Copper Raja. And it will always have the same issue of, you gotta predict really well, I feel, a lot of the time, to maximize Copper Raja's ability to break. And with Assault Vest, you don't have natural recovery, you can't, you're not running rest like maybe SDS Scavalier does. You are weak to ground even, so I mean, that's another benefit to Scavalier, I guess, over Raja. There's like enough small things hitting against Copper Raja at this point to say it's more on the level of the other steel types as opposed to above them. I think even a lot of people would rate it behind Staka and a Scavalier at this point. Decidueye dropped to B+. I always kind of felt it was a little overranked, but it's still fine. Nasty Plot got used last week in UPL and it looked pretty good, so maybe it'll rise back later. I don't know. Golurk down to B+. I feel like this Pokemon got to A rank on the VR, and slowly just got worse in the eyes of people. At this point, I mentioned a little earlier with talking about Drapion, there's just not... People don't view offensive ghost types as being overly potent like we used to. And even looking at it from the angle of ground types, we have so many options. I'm not using Golurk very frequently because I just need a ground type, I always feel like I could find a way to default to one of Mudsdale, Silvally Ground, Quagsire, or Sandaconda instead. All of which I feel are a little bit nicer to have around. Guzzlord to B+, that one surprised me a little bit, frankly. I thought Guzz would stay A-, but its breaking power isn't as good as it once was, and, despite Toxic Power Points being more than Heal Bell Power Points, those defensive sets feel less capable of just slowly beating down a whole team with, knockoff Protect Toxic, compared to prior metas. And we see Exploud dropping to B, it's just not that good of a breaker. There's a Steel type on every team, and I don't want to use Focus Blast or Hydro Pump to catch them once. There are other breakers that are simply more simple to use, really. Like I talked about Machamp earlier. That Mon just clicks one move, and it's getting progress. It feels like with Exploud, yeah, you're still doing a lot of damage with specs, but you often have to, I feel, greed for another hit versus a lot of the steel types to really maximize it. And I think Stakataka dropping was the main thing, because you can't even really Boom Burst spam versus that Mon reliably. You really want to catch it with Focus Blast, and that's just, this feels bad to have to do. We got Passimian down to B. Rotom-Mo is the best Scarfer. Scarfing D is risen, and teams are really prepared for a Pokemon that is reliant on CC and only CC to do big damage. Yes, you could still be a U-turn bot, but in a meta where Rocky Helmet is not an uncommon item and Talonflame is not an uncommon Pokemon, being a U-turn bot is not all that exciting. It's still a fine option as a Scarfer, and it's not like you're dead weight against those things. You can knock a helmet off a Pokemon, You can catch Talonflame with a Rock Slide, and, just Okos, but I don't think it's as effective as it had been in the past. We got Rhydon down to B-. I still think this Pokemon's just bad, but I think some of it being kept in B- is at the very least, it's sort of like an offensive / defensive Salazzle. It's an okay breaker because of its power with Sword Stance too, so you could run Stealth Rock, Sword Stance, and then Dual Stabs for your moves. So we'll get some decent use out of it. But I think it's dropping still more and more because partly I don't think having a flying resist is overly necessary on a lot of teams. You look at our offensive flying types and it's like Braviary? Let's actually look at the VR real quick. Where's the first offensive flying type? Aerodactyl? Yeah, I don't need Rhydon to check Aerodactyl. I could have Mudsdale for that. Yeah, Braviary. Down in B-. Woohoo. And then we got some unranks. Druddigon, Zatu's just been falling off. It's still really good, but if Zatu's not going to be on every other team, Druddigon's niche is pretty irrelevant. And then Aurorus is just not caught on past the Slush Rush bans of yesterday. But I hope y'all enjoyed this VR update. There's a lot that rose and not so much that dropped, but I think our VR is honestly looking to be quite nice nowadays. I think it looks a lot more indicative of the meta at large, especially with Rotom-C being just firmly at the top. Let's actually even look at the VR. Rotom-C firmly at the top above everything else. The next tier being, you know, a couple of the ground types. Dragalge, just generally great Pokemon. Talonflame, generally great Pokemon. And then the steel types and the Wish Passers. And then here, I mean, used to feel a little out of place. Yeah. But otherwise, I think it looks great. I hope y'all enjoyed it. As always, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.